Hi guys, welcome to techydiy. In this video I'm going to make a concrete Bluetooth speaker. To start with, I'm going to make a mould to cast the concrete tube that forms the body of the speaker. The outer part of the mould is a length of PVC underground drainage pipe, and I cut that to length with a normal handsaw. The inner part is cut from PVC gutter downpipe. And these two pipes are going to be mounted vertically to form the mould. To keep the pipes in position, I'm going to cut some circles. There are lots of ways of doing this, but in this case I'm using a circle or fly cutter tool. The first thing I always do is to run the blades over a sharpening stone, as they tend to become blunt quite quickly. And then I measure the inside diameter of the outer tube and set the blades to cut a circle of that diameter. The easiest way to do that is to set the first blade to half the diameter, scribe a circle with the first blade, check that the diameter is correct, and then use the scribe circle to set the second blade. It is important to really tighten the blades down, as they can easily fly off and cause injury. Then I cut a disc out of a polyethylene plastic chopping board. I use this material because it's cheap, waterproof, and it's also easy to cut. The two wooden mounting rings for the speakers are the same outer diameter, so I cut out two discs from 1/4 inch plywood. And I also measured the inside diameter of the inner pipe and cut two plastic discs to fit. For the base plate I used a scrap piece of laminate flooring. First I drilled a pilot hole, created clearance for the bolt head with a Forstner drill bit, and then I drilled out the pilot hole to accept the bolt. The large and small plastic discs were then bolted to the base plate. To mount the wooden speaker rings, I'm going to cast mounting nuts into the end of the concrete tube. These are located midway between the inner and outer edges of the mould and held in place by bolts which pass through the base plate. I made up a paper template to accurately drill the two holes through the large plastic disc and the base plate. Then I used a Forstner drill bit to drill two clearance holes for the bolt heads. The holes also need to be accurately drilled in the wooden discs, so I used the large plastic disc as a guide. The bolt in the first hole is there to keep the discs aligned. Now the base can be assembled. the mounting nuts bolted to the base, and to stop concrete getting into the nuts, I sealed the tops with hot glue. The next thing to do is cut out the speaker holes in the wooden discs. I screwed down the disc to the board using the existing holes, changed the blade cutting edge on the circle cutter to face outwards, and then set the cutter to a slightly smaller diameter than the speaker. I scribed a circle and checked the diameter. Then the second blade was set. I cut the inner circle and turned over to finish. After some light sanding, I gave the two wooden rings a coat of varnish. It can be quite difficult to remove the mould once the concrete is set, so to make this easier, the outer pipe was cut in half. The reason for making two cuts in the pipe was that I had originally planned to cast the switch and power socket directly into the concrete, but as the project moved forward I decided to cast holes instead, so if I was doing this again I would make just one cut. Because the walls of the pipe are thick, it retains its shape. Next I taped the outer pipe back together and drilled holes for the switch and the power socket. The holes in the concrete will be formed by using a plastic pipe or wooden dowel of the correct diameter. I clamped the inner pipe and the outer pipe together. And used the outer pipe as a guide to drill the inner pipe. Next I drilled pilot holes through the outer pipe and used screws to centralise the inner pipe. I applied silicone sealant to seal the joints. And then the pipes were installed, keeping the switch and power holes aligned. I used plastic pipe for the first hole and a wooden dowel for the second. I rubbed a wax crayon on the wooden dowel to stop the concrete sticking to it. Then I applied a bit more sealant and left it to cure. For the concrete, I've used extra rapid cement and ballast, which is a mixture of sand and gravel. I didn't want the larger stones in the mix, so I removed them with a garden sieve, and then I measured out 2 tubs of ballast and half a tub of cement for a 4:1 mix ratio. You can also use normal Portland cement or pre-mixed dry bagged concrete instead. I thoroughly dry mixed the concrete before adding small amounts of water and mixing. For the best result, I try to add the minimum amount of water to make the concrete workable. Now it's time to fill the mould. I've added the second small plastic circle as a cap to stop the concrete falling down the centre tube. Then it's a case of filling the mould with some concrete, tamping the mixture down with a piece of dowel to remove any air bubbles, and repeating the process until the whole mould is filled. Concrete is abrasive, caustic, and it will dry out your skin, so it's important to wear hand and eye protection. I've also used an electric sander to vibrate the sides of the mould, which helps liquefy the concrete so that it can move around in the mould and release any air bubbles from the mixture. This helps give a much better result. The positioning screws can now be removed, the cap removed and the top smoothed over, and then the wooden ring with the installed nuts pushed into the concrete. Another quick blast with a sander, and then finally clean up the edges. This now needs to be covered and left. Concrete cures rather than dries, so it's important to keep it slightly damp until it has fully hardened. The wooden ring can now be unscrewed, leaving the nuts embedded in the concrete. The pipes removed, which should leave clean holes all the way through the concrete. The tape and the sealant removed. Turn the mould upside down and remove the 2 bolts. The outer tube can now be split apart. And the cast concrete lifted away from the base. I'm going to leave the smaller PVC pipe in place as it adds strength to the assembly and helps to make the tube waterproof. I rubbed the concrete down with sandpaper and then blasted the dust away with compressed air. Finally, I gave the concrete several coats of clear lacquer. To make the stand, I used the off-cuff plywood where I cut out the circles. I squared it up on all 4 sides. And then cut it in half. I cut the edges at an angle. And then drilled holes through either side. I gave them a coat of varnish, and then I measured 2 lengths of stainless steel threaded rod, cut them to length, and filed off the sharp edges. Then I joined the 2 end plates using the threaded rods, nuts and dome nuts. Moving on to the electronics, the parts are a pair of speakers, a Bluetooth amplifier module, a TP4056 charger module, an 18650 battery and a battery holder, a switch and a power socket, some speaker wire and some hookup wire, and nylon plastic standoffs and screws. To make the Bluetooth module work, we just have to connect the speakers and the power. The power is supplied by a rechargeable 18650 battery. The switch turns the power on and off to the Bluetooth module, and the TP4056 module is there to charge and protect the battery. To charge the battery, an external power supply or a USB charger is connected to the power socket. First of all, I soldered 2 lengths of speaker wire to the speakers, and then soldered the speaker wires to the Bluetooth module. I tested the Bluetooth module by plugging a USB power supply into the micro USB socket. I soldered red and black hookup wire to the Bluetooth module power input pads. Then I soldered wires to the TP4056 battery pads. And 2 more wires to the TP4056 power input pads. One thing I found with these modules is that it's a good idea to solder both sides of the pads. I needed a place to mount the electronics, so I cut a length of wood, drilled holes in either end, glued in wooden dowels, cut 2 plywood discs to fit the inside diameter of the concrete tube. I made a notch for wiring in the edge of each disc, and I varnished the wood parts. Then I used the pins on the battery holder to mark their positions on the wood, drilled clearance holes for the pins, and then screwed down the battery holder to the wood base. On the opposite side of the wood base, I marked the position of the Bluetooth module mounting holes, drilled the marks with a slightly undersized drill bit, and used a screw to form threads in the holes. Then I screwed in nylon standoffs and attached the Bluetooth module with nylon screws. A length of red hookup wire was soldered to the positive output pad of the TP4056 module. The negative power wire from the Bluetooth module was soldered to the negative output pad on the TP4056 module. The negative and positive battery wires from the TP4056 module were soldered to the battery holder. To test everything was working, the battery was inserted and the two switch wires twisted together. The TP4056 module was hot glued to the base, and the discs were glued to the end of the wooden base, before cutting off the excess wooden dowels. The battery was tie wrapped to the holder, and then the speaker and holder were inserted into the concrete tube, feeding the wires for the power switch and power socket through their respective holes. I plugged the power supply into the power socket and used a voltmeter to identify which pins were positive and negative. Then I slipped heat shrink tubing over the power socket wires, stripped the ends of the wires and soldered them to the power socket terminals. I did the same with the switch, and then used hot air to shrink the heat shrink tubes. Switch and power socket were installed in the holes, and the speakers were glued to the wooden rings using super glue. Once the glue was dry, the speakers were attached to the ends of the concrete tube using set screws. That's the speaker finished. A 5V power supply is plugged in to charge up the battery, the switch turns the speaker on, and then it can be paired with a Bluetooth device. Further information about the project can be found in the video description. Any questions, please leave a comment, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, then please subscribe and select the notification bell.